About a month after another early postseason exit, Jazz head coach Quin Snyder has resigned. And according to Woj, Jazz star Donovan Mitchell is not pleased.
It was a jarring day yesterday. It was a jarring conversation for Donovan Mitchell to have. Listen, there's a reason Utah tried so hard to keep Quin Snyder.
So with the recent questions about Mitchell's future with the Jazz, does Utah have any hope at this point? Hello everyone, welcome back to Into Sports. I'm your host Evan. Today we're talking about Donovan Mitchell and the Jazz. But before I do me a big favor and click the subscribe button because, well, it would help me out a lot. Anyways, now, I understand if you want to take the optimistic point of view on the Jazz, because you could easily say, well, look at Boston, because the Celtics were really good for about 9 years under Brad Stevens, who was seen as a great coach, but it really felt like they hit their ceiling. Then Brad Stevens stepped away into a new role, they hire Ime Udoka, and now they're in the NBA Finals. But the Jazz are different. The Jazz have major flaws that the Celtics did not have. They aren't going to finally break through after a coaching change like the Celtics did. Now, everyone thinks that problem is Rudy Gobert. He's won 3 of the last 5 Defensive Player of the Year awards. But the Jazz have been torched defensively in the playoffs over the last couple of years. Their defensive rating has gotten worse by an average of 9 points per 100 possessions over the last 3 postseasons. And no, that's not because the competition is better, because defensive rating only goes up by 0.6 of a point on average in the playoffs. So the Jazz have been significantly worse in the playoffs on defense, and that's why they've been early exit after early exit. The last 2 years, both the Clippers and the Mavs have played with 5 shooters on the perimeter. That way Rudy Gobert can't just sit in the paint ready to play help defense and block shots. And if he did, then they would get a wide open corner 3. They made him stand in the corner and guard a shooter. And then if he does help, they drive and kick to that shooter and knock down threes. So Rudy Gobert exposed, right? Actually, no. More like rest of the Jazz exposed. Because what we've seen in the playoffs recently is that when Gobert isn't in the paint to cover up his teammates' mistakes, teams can get to the rim at will against the Jazz. The problem with the Jazz is that they have maybe the worst perimeter defense in the entire league. As Patrick Beverley would say, they're traffic cones out there. So Rudy Gobert has been the scapegoat for an issue with the rest of his team. But actually, even he isn't going to escape totally clean in this video. Because I mentioned teams putting 5 shooters on the perimeter. It was a mismatch for the Jazz defensively in a negative way, but it should also be a mismatch for the Jazz offensively in a good way. You'd think that a 7'1" Rudy Gobert with a 7'9" wingspan would be able to dominate a smaller 6'8" defender like Nick Batum in the Clippers series. But that didn't happen. Rudy Gobert's problem is not on the defensive end. He's absolutely elite. His problem is offensively. He can't punish teams for playing small ball. Just 12 points in 33 minutes a game in the series against the Mavs this year. But even with Gobert's offensive limitations, Donovan Mitchell needs to pass to him more than 2 times per game. Yes, that's right. According to Second Spectrum, Mitchell only passed to Gobert 2.7 times per game. And no, that's not assists, that's total passes. And that's despite them playing over 30 minutes a game together. Now for reference, and this was the only data I could find, so we kind of have to use a small sample size here, but during the first 13 games of the 2019 season, LeBron James passed to Anthony Davis 21 times per 30 minutes of shared action. Mitchell to Gobert, just 2 times. Again, small sample size, Laker data from a couple years ago, but that just gives you some perspective. That's more of a typical number as compared to the 2 by Mitchell and Gobert. So there's been a lot of reporting on the shaky relationship between Gobert and Mitchell, and then you see it manifest on the court, not just off the court. They really just don't work well together. Like here, Gobert has a 6'4" Jordan Poole on him right under the basket, but Mitchell plays iso ball instead. Again, Gobert, 7'1", 7'9" wingspan. Same thing with Klay Thompson, sealed directly under the basket, and Mitchell doesn't even think about it. So it's pretty clear that Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert do not work well together on or off the court. So the Jazz can either trade Mitchell, trade Gobert, or trade both and do a full rebuild. But this is why the thumbnail of the video says harsh reality, because I don't think any of these options would work very well. Because if they trade Mitchell, then they would really just be an old team without a star. If they trade Gobert, then they'll be atrocious defensively and probably won't even make the playoffs. And if they blow it up and try to tank, they're guaranteed to be terrible for at least the next half decade. So I guess I would say the best option is to trade Gobert and maybe a draft pick for a couple of two-way wings, because they need to fix their perimeter defense. And if they could surround Mitchell with 3-and-D guys, then they could try to do to other teams what the Mavs and Clippers did to them. That would be a pretty good path. But I don't know if Gobert has that level of trade value that you could really surround Mitchell with multiple good 3-and-D guys. So as I mentioned earlier, the Jazz are not the next Celtics, where they have a lot of success, but they hit their ceiling. And then they hire a new coach, and they break through that ceiling. The Jazz have a massive issue, that being their perimeter defense. In a perimeter-oriented league, by the way. Their two stars don't work well together at all, on or off the court, so they need to break them up. But I don't see a trade of either Mitchell or Gobert making the Jazz real threats in the West. So after Quin Snyder's resignation, the future looks dicey at best for the Utah Jazz.